All right. So I thought we could just start with a minute or two of grounding as we did last time. I know it's helpful for me to just get fully present and in my body and not in my head. So if you'll just join me, if you'd like, you can put your hand on your chest or we're just going to notice the rise and fall of our chest as we breathe in and out through our nose. If you'd like, you can direct your attention to the temperature of the air as it goes in and out through your nose. See if you can notice a temperature difference. Okay, thank you, everyone. I welcome Jim and Steve, who've popped in the room since we last spoke, and Olga. So today we have with us the illustrious Lloyd Fickett, who is the founder of the Collaborative Way, which is, I don't know how many of you know about the Collaborative Way, but it's a paradigm or model for building a team of leaders, essentially, is from what I see, and Lloyd will share with you what he sees in that, of course, and how he founded that while working at Riddell with Steve. And I'm just really excited to have Lloyd with us here because he is actually extensive, big character in this chapter of Demolition in The Ultimate Coach. So some of you here, I think most of you are familiar with The Ultimate Coach, but I know my uncle Jim is here and may not have read it. This is the book by Amy Hardison, Steve Hardison's wife, and Alan D. Thompson, and it's a book about creating seeing what your current way of being is and who you would need to be to create the outcomes you desire in your personal and professional life. So I highly encourage anyone here who may not have read it to read this book. And Lloyd's book, The Collaborative Way, is discussed briefly in this chapter as well, and it's a wonderful book as well. So one of the 5 commitments in the Collaborative Way is to listen generously. And as we did last time, I just ask all of us to, from what I can tell, listening generously is about listening with total presence, with curiosity, with intention to learn, setting aside all your judgments and filters that you might have. And that's the practice of becoming aware of what those even are. And one thing that I love that I took away from the Collaborative Way is willingness to be influenced, which I thought was something that I hadn't really grasped before, was willingness to be influenced. So as we listen to Lloyd, as we listen to Hakeem actually read Being Into Business questions and the chapter, I ask for you to bring your attention back to center and notice when you're having judgments or filters come up or when you're getting distracted, and just listening generously throughout this call. We'll get the most out of it. So without further ado, Hakeem, I would ask, I'm going to mute, if I can mute everyone here except Hakeem. I just ask you to mute yourself if you're not speaking. And Hakeem, would you please read the Being Into Business questions?
Absolutely, Joan Claire. Thank you so much. And so nice to see everybody here today. I am delighted to be able to read these questions that we can ponder as we read the chapter and during the roundtable discussion today. So one by one, they are: who am I being as an employee, owner, leader, or coworker? Who am I being as a visionary for my company? Who am I being as an entrepreneur? Who am I being as a risk taker? Who am I being as a listener? And who am I being as a mentor or mentee? Who am I being with those with whom I'm experiencing conflict in the workplace? Who am I being when I make mistakes? Who am I being when coworkers and employees make mistakes? Who am I being when workload demands increase? Who am I being when projects don't go as planned? Who am I being with my family while I'm working and when I'm not working? Who would I need to be to create extraordinary value in the work I do? Who would I need to be to serve at the deepest level? Who would I need to be to help my team reach the next level? Who would I need to be to have others trust that I will do what I say I will do? Who would I need to be more decisive and inspire confidence? Who would I need to be more fulfilled and joyful in the work that I do? Who would I need to be to read The Ultimate Coach and have a personal breakthrough in my business and work? We ask that you always remain respectful of others and be open to listening to others without judgment. As a possibility, no one is worthy of our judgment, and everyone is worthy of our love and respect, even in business.
Thank you, Hakeem.
Thank you.
Steve, I'd like to allow you to speak because I know you need to go here soon.
I want to say something about Lloyd, if that's okay, because the Collaborative Way is much more than just a book. It's a gift on being that hundreds and thousands of hours of research with human beings in different companies. Lloyd is an extraordinary person. I wouldn't be doing what I do today if it weren't for having watched Lloyd. I watched him inside of Rodell and I thought, gosh, someday that might be something I could do, have that kind of impact on people. And it's because of Lloyd that Rodell went from a $20 million company to triple digits. And that when this company was sold, that the founders were able to donate $85 million to the educational fund of the state of Arizona. I've introduced Lloyd to several different companies, and he does the same thing everywhere he goes. He creates magic by people learning how to be and work together as a team. Lloyd, I love you. I appreciate all you've done for me, and I appreciate all that I don't know that you've done for me. I love you.
I love you, Steve. Thank you so much. And Joan Claire, thank you for setting all this up and inviting me. And it's going to be a delight to read this chapter together, Demolition, and also to explore the collaborative way. So with that said, Joan, Claire, anything else you want to say before I begin reading the chapter?
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Lloyd. Thank you, Steve, for that acknowledgement of Lloyd.
Yeah, it's the feeling is quite mutual. And sometimes Steve will say to me, there's no Steve Artisan without Lloyd Fickett, but there was also be no Lloyd Fickett in the Collaborative Way without the stand that Steve was for me, that we'll be reading about. So it's a mutuality in co-creation. So Demolition. He's good. Amazing, actually. He could help us, Steve thought. Steve was sitting in a landmark forum seminar. At the front of the room, leading the seminar, stood Lloyd Fickett. Lloyd was impressive. He was distinguished in appearance, articulate, and masterful in leading the seminar participants from breakdowns to breakthroughs. He had a keen understanding of Werner Erhard's work, something no doubt honed when he worked for Werner in San Francisco. Lloyd's job had been to make sure all the telephone cords were consistently straight and untangled on every phone in a 7-story building. In a world of cell phones, sans cords, the difficulty of this task might be undervalued. Before 1990, the possibility for a tangled cord existed every time the phone was hung up. Lloyd could not run around the building straightening every cord after every call. He had to enroll every person into the commitment to untangled cords. He had to get people to see that impeccability existed in the smallest of actions. This was rigorous training in getting everyone in a company in alignment. It was perfect training for what Rodell needed. At first, Don Buttinger was hesitant to hire Lloyd as an executive coach. He wasn't sure they needed an outsider to come in and help them. Plus, Lloyd was expensive. Steve was insistent that hiring Lloyd, who could see with clarity because he was from the outside, was exactly what Rodell needed. Eventually, Don hired Lloyd to work with the executive team. Together, Lloyd and the team created the Rodale Principles, which Lloyd later developed into his collaborative way. They were: listen generously to each other, speak straight to each other, be for each other, honor our commitments, be a source of acknowledgement and appreciation. Rodale was already doing these things to some degree, but the organization wasn't quite we, explains Lloyd. These Rodale Principles or commitments established a context for how they would work together and support each other. Lloyd's work with Rodale was exceptional. After the company's culture was in place, Lloyd took groups of key employees into the wilderness where they jumped off cliffs, ran through a ropes course, and participated in activities that pushed them physically and emotionally. But that came later. First, Lloyd was about to rock Steve's world. Early in July 1991, Lloyd entered Steve's office at Rodale and closed the door. He held his tightly clenched fist in front of his chest and said, "Steve, what's this all about?" "What are you talking about?" asked Steve. Lloyd raised his eyebrows. It was so obvious. Lloyd came at it from another direction. "You're constantly on edge and stressed. What's behind that?" Lloyd had no answer. Lloyd continued, "Almost all of us are born belonging. At some point, an event occurs and all of us, find we are alone. We're not prepared for that moment. It's disconcerting. We respond based on patterns that are already in place. Over time, these patterns solidify and form our fundamental approach to life. They usually have a very strong emotional anchor." Lloyd had a process to heal this break in belonging. It consisted of 2 sessions. In the first, Lloyd helped his clients remember early events in their lives, the decisions they made about those events, and the patterns that emerged. Lloyd usually held the second session a week later. This session included breathing exercises, exploring what the client had learned during the week, and further processing of early experiences. Everyone Lloyd had taken through this process found it to be a fundamental turning point in their lives, including Lloyd himself. He asked Steve if he was interested in doing it. Steve was all in. Steve arrived for his first session the next Friday evening. Lloyd and a gentleman named Ron sat in Lloyd's office. They both had yellow legal pads. Steve took a seat in the middle of the room. "Where were you born? How many siblings do you have? What do you remember about?" Lloyd's voice was calm. His questions were constant, like an escalator. For 3 hours, Lloyd queried, Steve responded, and Lloyd and Ron captured Steve's answers on legal pads. Lloyd flipped to the first page of the legal pad and began to read Steve's answers back to him. Any of the following could have been written down. "Your uncle constantly berated you and told you you would never amount to anything. You were jumped by a group of teenagers and beaten up, egged on by a family member. There was a young adult man who preyed on younger boys," and so on. There were some dark things. Steve felt dazed. He knew about these things. He had lived those things, but when they're laid out with their jagged edges exposed, with his soul naked, there was no pretending it didn't matter. There was no imagining it was a one-off. So many people had injured him. No one had protected him. No wonder he was angry. The first part of the process was complete. Steve drove a few streets away and parked under a tree. Tears welled up, then surged over their margins. Steve felt like he did when the water ski bashed into his bottom teeth, laying them flat and leaving the nerves exposed to cold air. His whole body was his teeth. July 17th, 1991, round 2. Steve knocked on the office door. A very pregnant woman greeted him warmly. Lloyd introduced her as Carrie and explained she was here to hold the space of love and to guide Steve in some breathing exercises. The office now had a large mattress on the floor. It was for Steve. Lloyd settled into his chair. Steve relaxed into the mattress. Lloyd picked up his list of last week's questions and responses. He read the list slowly, pausing to ask how Steve felt and if there was anything he wanted to say. There was so much to say. Steve's emotion began to seethe like magma. Lloyd read Steve's description of his experience of having an ear bitten, gnawed, twisted by a family member. It had happened over and over until Steve's ear became grotesquely misshaped, like a pixie ear. He had to have surgery to fix it. The pregnant woman gently touched Steve's ear. Steve hurled a defiant scream. The rage spewed. Steve bolted to his feet. "Stay on the mattress," Lloyd yelled. Steve obeyed, but his energy defied containment. He thrashed, he kicked, his foot connected with Lloyd's file cabinets. The wood splintered. Lloyd relates, "The anger that came up was overwhelming. I had never met that much anger. I was looking at how to dispel it. I handed him a couple legal pads. He ripped them up, but that did nothing to curb his anger. So I handed him a phone book. It was too big to rip up, so he tossed it. It was pretty clear to me this wasn't going to stop. The only way to stop it was to enter his energy field and risk what might happen. And that's what I did. I got down on the floor with him, and fortunately, we were able to connect. He calmed down." Steve remembers curling into the fetal position and Lloyd wrapping his arms around him. Lloyd whispered, "Steve, there's nothing left for you to prove. You're okay. Everything's all right. There's nothing to prove." Eventually, Steve's breathing slowed. His energy ebbed. He felt purged. Lloyd felt it was safe for the expectant Carrie to be close to Steve. Together, Lloyd and Carrie nurtured Steve. When Steve was grounded, he and Lloyd went to lunch and they continued processing. Food tastes different. They went for a walk in the desert. Everything looked different. Steve felt like he had just experienced a rebirth. Before driving home, Steve reclined in his seat all the way back and took some deep breaths. He reflected on his experience. Instead of basking in the afterglow, his peace started to disintegrate. He picked up his car phone and dialed Amy. He tried to describe what he'd gone through. His words crumbled. He began to sob. When he arrived home, Steve again folded into the fetal position. He stared at the wall for the rest of the day and night and the weekend. On Monday morning, Steve had to go to work. His body went, his heart and soul were splattered. Steve limped along for 6 months. Each day, the thought of getting out of bed and going to work became more and more oppressive. Finally, Steve went to Don and told him he had to quit. Don offered him 30 days off. Steve took them. For 30 days, he sat and stared and cried. It bought him 90 more days at Rodell, but by then his golden boy image was tarnished. For Steve, that hardly mattered. He had nothing more to give Rodell. He barely had enough to live. Lloyd helped negotiate the departure. He says, Steve was a powerful part of Rodell. He played a big role in the Rodell merger. He was a tremendous source of inspiration and leadership. He loved so many of the people there, and they loved him. Separating wasn't going to be an easy thing. And there were also economics involved. It was a very challenging process, one of the hardest I've been through personally in terms of trying to make it work for him and work for the company. The details were handled, the dissolution was achieved, the relationship between Steve and Don was smudged, but it would heal with time. What were Steve and Amy going to do with their house they just moved into, the one they'd been building for 2 years? What are they going to do with their lives? The future looked bleak.
Thank you, Lloyd. I know Steve had to go to, oh, he's going to his doctor's appointment, I guess, in transit. Lloyd, I'd love to give you the opportunity to share what this chapter means to you, or anything about it that touches your heart that you'd like to share.
Let's see. You know, shucks. Let's see. Hey, here we go. Just, you know, in the chapter before, it says that as it closed, chapter 15 says, Steve was a pressure cooker. He was going to blow. The question was when. So when we stepped into this process, I didn't realize how close he was. That's exactly how I later could see it. It was like like the pot of water was about to explode, and we managed to open the lid just before it did. It would have been a catastrophe without, but it was still a really rough ride. And Steve went through, as obvious, and as he shares, went through a great deal through this transformation. So, and fortunately,
I had no idea.
Fortunately, he found his way through to a whole new world that he is able to create and live in. And as it says, the breaking belonging came from a perspective that we all, almost at least, all of us are born deeply belonging, and to a point where there isn't even a notion of belonging. You know, you just are connected. And at some point, we all wake up to, whoa, I am not connected. You know, I'm here alone, or I don't have that connection, and there is other, and I'm separate. And in that moment, we have to deal with it in some way. And however we deal with it, that is a foundational to then how we deal with the rest of our life. And so, and it plays itself out every day in the way we live. So we would work to get back and find a very, like it was really obvious, this pattern that was up for Steve. We worked to get as far back as we could. And then saw where the roots were, events that occurred, and then how he related to those events and the decisions that he made, that he then lived out of, and then defined how he related to so many of the things in his life. And that in waking up to those, there was the possibility, those decisions was those reactive pattern, fundamental reactive pattern. There was the opening in recognizing it to begin to care for it, so that it's not that necessarily it ever completely goes away, but in becoming a friend with that pattern, it becomes my ally. And rather than it taking me away from myself, it becomes my call when I feel it arising to center in being. And so that is the possibility. And so it was a lot to integrate, and fortunately that went well. So
Yeah.
for all of us.
Yes, thank you, Lloyd. Yeah, I hear in what you're saying, it's a process of bringing to the light those dark areas and self-awareness, so that when it does come up, you can, like you said, befriend it and not have it be this something that you shun and in a reactive manner respond to people and situations. And I want to acknowledge you for being for Steve. Steve's I don't know if I can put Steve on mute as he's traveling. I want to acknowledge you for being for Steve in this context there at Rodell, and advocating, asking him, what's this about? You could have gone back in the shadows and just kind of like, oh, hopefully he'll get through this stressful thing that he's going through. Obviously you're the coach there, so that's part of your job, but as a possibility for all of us or people in the workplace, we could be for our colleagues and be straight with them and see when there's something going on and inquire. And because you inquired and you helped him through this, we now have the gift of who Steve is today, which has had this ripple effect in the world, which has been such a gift to me personally, and I know for all of you on this call. So thank you for who you were being in that moment and in helping Steve bring some of these dark moments to light and shift who he was being with that darkness. So thank you so much, Lloyd.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And,
yeah.
So
Hakeem, I would love to give you the opportunity next to share what this chapter has meant for you, or any insights you've had around your being or in working with clients in the business world and so forth.
Yeah, thank you, John Claire. And thank you, Lloyd, for reading that chapter and for doing all that you did. I think it was beautiful. What really moved me was the container that Lloyd was able to create for Steve to process in the way that he did in that particular chapter. And when I thought about it, I was writing down things even as Lloyd was reading, safety, caring, nurturing, curious. These are not often words that we first hear used when describing strong, efficient, effective leaders. And I think that there's a lot of room for that in leadership. I think understanding that there's another layer and level to those that we work next to, or that work under us, is such an essential piece of being an effective leader, not just towards the bottom line, but really shaping the people that are in our charge. And Lloyd did that so beautifully in his work with Steve. But I think that we can all learn something. Maybe we don't have the capacity to do that at the level that Lloyd did in certain circumstances in the workplace, but we can embody that and what that represents as leaders for our clients, for our coworkers, for our direct reports. And I think if we create a culture that sort of signifies that this is all okay and that this is what we're committed to as professionals, we all get to grow. So thank you, Lloyd, for that.
yes, that's beautiful what you just said, and that is what the collaborative way is all about. And what we're talking about in the collaborative way is really, it's so connected to what we were up to with the break and belonging. It's really the same thing in a way that can be easily integrated rather than so challengingly integrated. And that can be done not as an individual merely, but as where the focus is on the collective, on how do we work and relate together, so that we can come to learn a way of being together at work, in a way of relating at work, so that and that was the breakthrough that the collaborative way was built on, in that we needed an extraordinary way of working together at Rodell to meet the future that was coming, this future that planarization and polishing silicon wafers was this breakthrough, so you could have printed circuits upon printed circuits upon printed circuits in one computer chip, which was a fundamental breakthrough to us being able to be on Zoom today. Without that breakthrough, we wouldn't be here today. And with the vision of the leadership of Rodell, could see that if they're going to continue to be world leaders, they had to come up with an extraordinary way of working together, because they're going to be met by the companies with far more money, far more PhDs that were going to enter the market as the market exploded. And so we were engaged in, how do you build this? It's an extraordinary way of working together. We started, as most often we do, by building leadership in individuals, building communication skills, building commitment. And we were making progress, but when I looked at the progress, I was like, whoa, I don't think this progress is going to make it to what's coming. When 3M and Cabot come into our market, it's going to be like, whoa, we got to move faster. And so when I looked honestly at it, I was up against a corner, and we were up against a corner. And in that was when the breakthrough occurred, that was recognizing that if you want an extraordinary way of working together, it's essential that you call out a small set of practice that will define how we're going to work and relate together, and then take on together learning to work that way. Until then, even if you have these incredible, deeply developed individuals, there's still this, you don't get the benefit of all that. And by calling out how we're going to work together, then now we can have this opportunity, and you're doing it in a framework or context of learning where we're going to learn together to work this way. That's where the magic happens. And then the 5 commitments are, I mean, they're in a certain way, I was just fortunate how it unfolded, but if we just listen a little better, speak straight a little better, be for each other a little better, honor our commitments a little better, each be a little more of a source of acknowledged appreciation across the enterprise. Whoa, we're going to really elevate our performance as a team. And then if we actually really deeply learn this practice, we will get to extraordinary. And so it's so much the same way, because what it's all about is the same thing. It's like, how do we learn to listen generously? Well, we got to recognize when we're not listening generously. What's going to have us not listen generously are our reactive patterns. So those are our filters, are just one form of reactive pattern. When we can start to wake up to our filters, we have just that possibility have had a major transformation. When we can wake up to the fact we're always listening through filters, it's like Robert Keegan, one of the leading thought leaders in adult education, he says transformation is the subject-object shift. So that which was subject becomes object. Before you had this distinction filters, you were just, however you were hearing the person is how they are. When you get filters, you go, whoa, I have a filter for my mom, she's this way. If I could set that aside just a little bit and get curious, whoa, I could hear something entirely new. And without making a big deal out of it, that is a fundamental transformation and awakening that leads to so much development. And then you keep going like that with each of the practices. It's similar. What keeps us from speaking up? A reactive pattern. Can I see that as a pattern rather than buying into all my justifications, excuses, et cetera, et cetera? And if I'm really taking on that practice, it begins to require of me to meet those patterns and recognize them and then choose to speak straight. And as you take on that practice, you come up against, all of us meet eventually, uncomfortableness. What keeps us from speaking straight or being effective in speaking straight is we're uncomfortable. And then can we own that uncomfortableness? Can we begin to see it instead of, these are just reactive patterns. It's just something in the present moment is reminding us of something in the past, and we're going, and we don't have to identify as that. We can allow that to be center in what we're up to and speak straight. So this is the path of the collaborative way.
Yeah. Thank you, Lloyd. I have a quick question for you before we open up the floor to everyone else. I'm curious, when you bring the collaborative way into organizations, what kind of resistance do you encounter among the leaders or people? Do you encounter resistance very often? And if so, what have been your strategies for helping people see how this is it just a matter of explaining how these work and how this is going to benefit you and help you get to your focus, your outcomes, your mission, and just a matter of starting to have them experiment with it? Or curious a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's, thanks for the question. And I think it starts with the latter. It's you get enrolled out of experiments, putting it in practice. And we usually, when we do it, we'll do a 3-day training, and we work really hard in the first day on listening generously, and then come back and do a debrief of an exercise around that then just opens they enroll themselves out of what they accomplished out of one night of listening generously. And then we move into all the rest of the practices. And then it comes from practice. Back in 1990 and 95, and then that's when we were spreading it in the beginning, you'd bring it into the collaborative way in, and it was challenging. It was very challenging to enroll them, the resignation was very deep, and we were able to do it, and it was really hard work. Today, when we walk into a team, it's almost always like, really? We could really work like this? Hallelujah. Now, then we got to go through all the hard practice, but it's greeted in a different way. It's one of the things that encourages me about the world, is the difference in my experience of what it's like to meet people in the beginning sessions these days as compared to what it used to be like. And then there'll be challenges, like if a leader has a really tough shadow side that's a blind spot, then that's really, I deeply identified with, and then after all, I got them to where they are. So it's a part of their success formula. So for them to wake up, and then to the cost and to the benefits that they're getting out of behaving this way, and see the impact. And
Sure.
They will come around almost always, not always, but it's rare that they don't. And even when we will work on occasions with a CEO who's like, oh, I'm miserable at this, guys, but this is what we need to do. Please help me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully that
Thank you.
answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I just say one more thing before I open it up. In reading the book, what I really loved about the collaborative way is the mutual accountability from people, but no matter where you are in a hierarchical level in a company or organization, it's like acknowledging people below you, acknowledging people above, holding each other accountable for your commitments, speaking straight to even someone above you about something you see. And I see that as an opportunity to build a lot of leaders within an organization versus, one top heavy leader and all these people beneath. So I love that about that. And the way it's written is very engaging. So just really encourage everyone here to get a copy.
It's beautiful that you recognize that, because that is the case, that when this practice is taken on in an organization, going to work becomes a leadership training program itself. The work itself becomes a leadership training program, and that leadership then spreads out into their family, into their community, and who they are being evolves. So it's an awakening and a development process. So
yeah, I've already seen that with my own clients and my own family. So thank you.
yeah,
I'd love to open the floor to anyone else. You want to raise your virtual hand, and we'll hear from you. Ipek.
Thank you. Thank you, Lloyd. It was a great reading. And this is one of the chapters that I really love from the book. Actually, I love every chapter, and I read multiple times, all of them. But here, this one, like all the five principles, as soon as the first time I read it, it resonated with me like immediately, that I wrote it on a piece of paper and put it on the fridge in our kitchen. And because I realized that this is it. This is what we all need to implement into our lives, not only at work, but everywhere.
Everywhere.
And
right?
especially with the people who are near and dear to our hearts. Because listening generously to each other, like speaking straight to each other without fear, without judgment, but only with love, being for each other. So being there, supportive, like honoring the commitments and being our word, and being a source of acknowledgement and appreciation, and giving generously our gratitude to other people. It only has only the positive impacts on everyone involved. So this has been like one of the most impactful chapters for me. So I thank you for creating these principles, and I thank Amy Hardison for including it in the book. Also, the belonging part. I'm so interested in the belonging concept, and I believe that yes, we are all alone, but as human beings, we crave belonging. We need belonging, and but at the end of the day, we are all alone, and the person, the one that we need to belong is ourselves first. We need to belong to ourselves, and then create belongings with the people who are aligned with us. The more aligned we get, the better relationships become. And that is so powerful, because then we feel safe, we feel heard, we feel understood and appreciated. So those are the things that I really appreciate about this chapter. So I wanted to share that, and I wanted to thank you, Lloyd. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
This is very beautiful, and you're pointing at one of the things that you've also pointed to that I hadn't mentioned, is that all these practices are focused towards forwarding what we're up to together, contributing to what we're up together, and that's where we get that alignment, and that's how we also true up the practices, so that they are real, they are forwarding, it's not just my opinion about it. Okay, so cool, thank you.
Thank you, Ipek. Carolyn.
Thank you, Joan Claire. I'm having a bit of a funny moment, because this is my 5th time, I think, reading the book, and I'm quite sure this chapter was not there any other time I read it, which gets even more bizarre, because last week I ran an executive retreat, and I think I used 3 of your 5 principles. They were so good, I thought they were my own idea. So I'm kind of clearly at some level, Lloyd, that went in very deeply. And as you were reading the chapter, I was just reminded of a conversation we were in probably this day last week with this team, where they were talking about, the team had been at quite a toxic level, and the idea was to create a breakthrough for them through this retreat. And at one point they got into this big debate about meetings. You know, there was Italians, French, Irish, and Scottish, and typically, and the company is based here in Ireland, typically Irish people might treat time as an approximate thing, and lateness can be quite culturally acceptable, which may not always be the case in others. So there was this debate about, was the meeting at 8:30 or 8:35? Does 8:30 mean 8:30? You know, or does it mean 8:30, grab a coffee, take off your coat, be ready to go at 8:35? And then we kind of talked about what was the impact of the 5-minute late start. And of course, it went on to be, well, we seem to discuss the most important thing at the end of the meeting. And then we don't have time. And if you tell me it's 1 hour, one person's putting on their coat saying, I'm ready to go now. And somebody else is saying, what time do you call this? Because actually, you know, we haven't finished our conversation, even though the time has elapsed. But in the conversation of what if this was about honoring your word? It totally shifted the debate away from, was the 5 minutes significant or not, to what did it say about them? That, you know, it was okay to be 5 minutes late and have the meeting spill over 10 minutes. What did that say to the person waiting to enter the room if they were in a physical location together? What did that say to the person who's waiting on them to show up somewhere else, or whatever the knock-on impact of the day? And it was amazing how it just went from something that seemed to be about a 5 minute, this is about, is this culturally acceptable or not, to, oh, it says something to be on time. And I haven't, obviously, given what the context I set, I have not read your book and your methodology, so there's a lot of homework for me to do out of this call. But I was just curious. What struck me in this is there's a simplicity to that it's not, it means you're a bad person or a good person to be late. It's just about noticing, what does that say about what it means to agree to meet at 8:30 or 8:35 or whatever.
Yeah.
And just the whole tone of it just changed, and that just struck me very deeply as something from a leadership standpoint, from an everyday, to Ipak's point. Yeah, being your word is not the big thing, it's the small things consistently done that actually really tell us whether or not we are a word.
Yeah.
So that was what I wanted to reflect.
Beautiful. Done or cared for, been responsible about. That's why we say honoring. So we're not locked into, it's not always the right thing to keep a commitment. Sometimes that will not forward what we're up to. But I don't then just throw that away. I have to honor the fact I've made this commitment and care for it. And it's not an arbitrary thing. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh,
what you said.
Lloyd, can you just say that again? Sorry. So honoring, I just think
We say
something is just
honoring
landing.
because that's the senior thing, is to honor your commitments. How do you care for them, including and honor them, when it isn't actually the forwarding thing to keep that commitment? And there are times when that is the case. And then it's going to require caring for that situation. But it's not you can't do that without, that's why inclusion is there, including whoever you made the commitment with. They share the commitment with you. It's not yours on your own. So there's a whole mutuality that must be cared for there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. That's super. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. It's reminding me of, in the chapter, impeccability exists in the smallest of actions, really how these principles play out. So thank you, Carolyn. Darren. Oh, I think you're on mute. Or I don't hear you. Do you guys hear Darren? No.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there you are. Now we
back.
hear you. Oh, now we lost you again. Let's see.
Speak and see if we can hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. So thanks, Joan Claire, and thank you, Lloyd, for this opportunity. One of the moments in this chapter that touches me, and I just would ask you to reflect on it for me, is when you decided and entered into Steve's energy field, and according to the book, risk what might happen. So my question is in two parts, really. Is who were you being when you did that, when you took that decision? And in the broader context, how do you manage when you were dealing with powerful, potentially destructive emotions, and be able to anchor into yourself and be of service to that person and to that situation?
Well, part of that answer, who I'm being is for Steve in that situation. It's also stepping into not knowing, being willing to trust the unfolding. Ultimately, we aren't in control of the unfolding. And then meet and embrace what's here. And then with intention, and yet accepting and embracing current reality, because only from current reality can we move forward. We can't move forward from anywhere else. And can't move forward from where it should be, ought to be, supposed to be, only where we are. And then it was just the willingness to then, we're going to dance with whatever arises. When I reached in there, and most fortunately, what didn't arise was a fist towards my head. And most fortunately, we melted together. So, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what struck me is your courage and taking the risk, because knowing the volatility of the situation or the potential of it, and how easily you can slip into self-preservation or protection of yourself and the environment.
Yes,
so
yes.
To me, it spoke to your courage, but also your care and your commitment to serving, and that's very inspiring. So thank you.
But it's also like it's in as it is with speaking straight. Okay, it's very easy to see the cost of and the risk of speaking straight. But what we often don't do is look at what's the risk and cost to what we're up to of not speaking straight. And when we get straight with ourselves about that, that's what will allow us to make the choice. And the cost of letting Steve sit there in that was too great. The risk of that was far greater than the risk. There, you can't escape risk other than blind yourself to it. And that's what we do so often in our interaction, is we blind ourselves to the risk of not taking action and not speaking up and meeting the moment. So it was another answer to your question. I was being very straight with myself about what was wanted and needed in this situation to forward what we're up to together. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you, Darren and Lloyd. Steve, Shaw.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joan Claire. What the powerful thing about this chapter for me was the idea that a sense of belonging that was ripped away, and that everyone needs to belong and collaborate. Because I guess what sold me on this book was knowing that I felt most of my life different, like I was alone. And I just thought that's just the way I was. It's just, just kind of grew up that way. The idea that I made a decision had not occurred to me very young until reading this book, that I actually made a decision very young. And so reading this chapter really resonated with me deeply, because I've basically lived majority of my life thinking that I'm on my own and really no one to reach out to. So, and that the idea that we are made to collaborate is very powerful, and that sharing, which is sometimes difficult for me, but is something that I must do. And so I want to thank you, because probably that reading Demolition was just, it just got me. And I said, I'm so glad. Wow, there's a reason. So thank you.
Yeah, very beautiful, beautiful. And congratulations on beginning to own that decision. And in that owning of it and recognizing it, you have that room to generate belonging. I very much relate to you. My mom left me when I was 3.5 years old. And that was the crushing break in belonging for me. And so I have real compassion and some level of awareness of what you're exactly talking about. So
thank you, Lloyd.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Lotto.
Hey, thank you, John Clare. This chapter of the book is one of the most precious and most deep for me. I became leader as a very young guy right after the university, and I was embodying all the shadow parts what you've been describing, up to a point back 9 years when the injury woke me up and I started to reflect who am I as a person in my life. And then 4 years ago, when I made a big career change and I joined the world leading company, a medical device producer, and I had the chance to meet Rich Habits and the U principles, U cultural movement. That was another game changer for my life, because I loved the simplicity for the mind and the deepness for the heart, which these principles are providing. I immediately became the ambassador of that movement, and that what resonates with me deeply is what you said, that it has impact to every area of my life. What kind of a husband I am, what kind of a father I am. I'm enrolling my children into this. I had a private session for my daughter a few weeks ago. I'm enrolling people from the community into this. It doesn't matter what's the context. This simply makes you a better person. And I'm on the way to become embodiment of these principles, and they are becoming part of my personal mission, which is to invite leaders to open their hearts and to become more aware of what impact they create for their people, for their families, for the world. So, and then a year and a half ago, when I discovered the book, when Rich came back from working with Steve, and I saw those principles there, it was like, oh, wow. And the demolition chapter as well is that what I'm going through myself for the last nearly a year, in getting rid of my old identity and finding my real purpose in life. So I cannot even count how many times I read it over the last year, and it's like a North Star for me to see what is possible. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for the gift you brought to this world. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Vlado. I love your inviting leaders to open their hearts. It's a beautiful way to say it. Trish.
Hi, everyone. And hi, Lloyd. It's so nice to meet you. I just started, I read The Collaborative Way on vacation about 2 weeks ago. And it was interesting because I had just scheduled, I had a trainer fly out from Florida to Phoenix, Arizona to train a group of my people. And when I got home from vacation, I realized that 6 of the 18 of them didn't show up for the training that had RSVP'd. And so that collaborative way was amazing, because I found myself fighting myself to hold them accountable. They were not my direct reports. But it's completely shifting the organization what I did, which was to ask them to get on a Zoom call with me once I returned, and just to talk about honoring our commitments and who we are and who I'm being to help them to honor those commitments. I also took responsibility for it. But what surprised me was I thought I had an amazing culture in my company, and to realize how deep so many of those not honoring commitments was running in my organization. One of the things that Steve coaches me on constantly is brushing over things in life. And if you brush over the little details, they come back to get you. It just like you guys are saying, it's those little details that really make the difference. And as hard as that was to take the time, I, said, oh, I don't have the time to do this, to schedule a Zoom call and then try to get these people on the call, of which some didn't come to the call at all, and some said they'd come to the call and didn't come to the call, but it unraveled all sorts of things. And it feels so powerful right now. So thank you to Steve, and for the book being written, and how this all led to, us having this conversation today, even. Just very powerful.
Beautiful. Thank you, Trish. And thanks. And I appreciate your awakening around your responsibility in the matter of the failure of these commitments to be kept. and your actions to care for that. So very good. Good for you.
Thank you so much, Trish, for sharing that with us. Philippe, I know we've got a couple more, so if you guys can stick around, we'll extend the call over the hour a little bit here.
Hey, Joanne, thanks for bringing us all together. And, I came across the collaborative way at just the perfect time. It was a time when it was last year, and I had a one-on-one client and asked me to coach her team for a startup. And in that moment, I just like, I don't know, what the hell am I going to do? How is this going to work? And it was, and I discovered the collaborative way. I took it on, and when I read it, for me, it was like, this is who I am. And it allowed me to bring myself into the team and for them to bring themselves and recognize themselves in these practices. I heard something tonight that I want to share, that a place where I've been working with this team for 6 months, sharing these practices, and I want to share something. I'd like, just a place where I felt that tonight I heard Lloyd talk about calling out. And I never really heard that before in this way. And calling out is different to, typically in companies you have, well, these are our values, this is what we align to. Calling out is championing the team to take responsibility for their practices, really, which is this idea of being for each other. And what I'm seeing is the power in having the team be responsible for this. And one of the things where I feel I fell short was I was trying to teach more and kind of like being impactful rather than stepping back and letting them be the ones that are driving it. I was driving it myself. What I got to learn from this experience was the power of the system and stepping back and allowing the team to actually become the collaborative way.
Beautiful.
And I'm still very much learning that, but it was the distinction, and just hearing the word calling out really helped that hit home tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I hear you saying that taking leadership sometimes means stepping back and allowing others to take ownership and responsibility. So thank you. Ian. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi, I just wanted to mention two things. I'm very, very fortunate to be a partner of Lloyd and the benefit of this content. And I can say, sharing this, the profound gift it is and the privilege it is to share this with people, to help, someone said earlier, make people better people. And I'll share that it's not a training or reading a book and putting the knowledge in your mind. It really is a living practice that Lloyd was pointing to. And the difference it makes is tremendous. I just want to say that in the chat, I put in the website, collaborativeway.com, with videos, and you can go and find some tips on what are the elements of requesting a commitment, honoring a commitment. How does the practice live, and just help your teams begin to elevate their practice. And at whatever level you understand it, reading the book, looking at the clips, what we have found is it will elevate the practice, and it begins to live amongst everybody. When we do the training, there's no videos or PowerPoints. It's all who we're being. And you can, essentially the practice, I'll leave it at this, is it's about taking more responsibility for who you're being, and then opening up your ability to recognize when you're not being who you aspire to be, centering in it and choosing to be who you're aspiring to be, and supporting each other to take that responsibility. And as somebody said earlier, there's no leadership is not an organizational chart. It's everybody is a leader if you're doing something extraordinary. And it requires, at this point in our culture of the planet, there's never a more important time. So thank you, Lloyd, and thank you, Steve, for the divine explosion that happened between you two that's rippling out and is rippling out of everybody in this group. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian, for sharing those in the chat. And I just want to reiterate what you said, just that this collaborative way is a way of being right? It's not just a training, like, here's what you need to do, step A, B, C, D. It's truly a way of being. And so I think I wanted to bring you all together here to kind of help us internalize more what this way of being is in the collaborative way, whether you got it from Lloyd or you came up with it on your own or through someone else, and truly how we can implement, an internal doing, this being of in the workplace and in our personal lives with our family members. So I really encourage all of you to read this book, though, about who you're being and who your clients are being and your colleagues, and be the leader wherever you choose to apply it. So thank you all for being here.
One more thing,
you.
Joanne, I want
Yeah.
to just add that there's another book as well for those that want to go deeper into this. I'm just going to put the link in, and it's
Okay.
the 7 pitfalls,
Mm,
overcoming the 7 most common pitfalls of leading the collaborative way, which is really practical. So for people that really want to take this deeper and understand how to actually bring this into the workplace, that's a great resource.
Thank you so much, Philippe. I saw that at a glance, and I definitely would want to read that. So thank you. Thank you, Lloyd, for being with us here today and reading that chapter for us that you were so much a central character in. And again, thank you for who you've been in your life, but also especially for Steve, who we're all, has deeply touched our lives and in you. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And thank you, Joan Claire, for your leadership and your putting all of this together so that we can be here together today and have this beautiful exploration and conversation together. So
Thank you so much.
Yes, I appreciate
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. And hi, Nihag, my friend who inspired me to do this. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.